Hi, this is Mr. Clemens from APUS History. I'm sorry that I'm out. I'm really uncomfortable and in a lot of pain today, but I'm going to try to do my best with this video for you guys for reviewing for the Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 APUS History test, which will be tomorrow and on Wednesday. Okay, so in going over Chapter 4, these are some of the things that will be important to know about. Okay, you'll need to make sure that you go over the information on the farm families with the husband heads of household and the wife as the helpmate. Make sure you look over motherhood, restrictions, no equality for women within the church. Most women accepted such restrictions as social norms. Make sure that you look over the property inheritance and family authority, children of wealthy parents, what happened with them, marriage and how the bride gave husband legal ownership of her property, and what the father's duties were. Also make sure you look over the freehold society in crisis, look at the population increase in the colonies and the changes in family life. Be sure to study the household mode of production. New England is a faltering economy. Poverty becomes a problem there. Shipbuilding gave region most leverage in the Atlantic economy, and so on. Okay. Also notice that in the middle colonies there was a lot of diversity. Look at the tenancy under the old Dutch plantations in New York. Also look at the conflict in the Quaker colonies. There's much cultural diversity, religious and ethnic diversity in the city of Philadelphia. There's also a German influx. People move into the settlements west of Philadelphia. The Scotch-Irish settlers also move in, and they move way into the backcountry for the most part. Also notice the religious diversity that's there, and how over time the Quaker population is overtaken by the Lutherans and the Baptists and the Methodists. Transportation, the print revolution, there's improved transportation networks. This leads to more printing as well as the publicity of newspapers, tracts, pamphlets, essays, those kind of things that are published for people to read. Also, it's very, very important to look over the Enlightenment in America. Remember, I posted up on the Enlightenment notes specifically that I gave you guys. But study the European Enlightenment, study John Locke, Benjamin Franklin's contributions to the Enlightenment. Also make sure that you look over American Pietism and the Great Awakening. Remember, Pietism, an evangelical Christian movement that stressed a personal relationship with God, attracted farmers and urban laborers, appealed to believers' hearts rather than their minds. Also make sure that you look over the origins of the revivals and then the First Great Awakening, or known as the Great Awakening. Make sure you know who Jonathan Edwards is, grandson of Solomon Stoddard. Make sure you know about his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. George Whitefield launches the Transatlantic Revival, the great preacher of the Great Awakening. Also some of the disruptions and the troubles that happen because people are able to wrap people up, but they're not able to get people to settle down. Then make sure that you understand how many men leave the church and join the Freemasons. There's also religious upheavals in the North, the old lights versus new lights, the old side versus new side. If you see old, think of conservatives, think of new, think of the people that are more open to the new religious ideas of the Great Awakening. So make sure you know about that. Social and religious conflict in the South. Make sure you read about the Presbyterian revival and the Baptist insurgency and the beginning of giving religion to the slaves. Okay, the Mid-Century Challenge, war, trade, and social conflict. The Albany Congress leading up to the French and Indian War. So make sure you study over that. Make sure you know Ben Franklin's Albany Plan of Union and the parts of it, which ultimately gets rejected. Also, make sure you understand how Britain in the war, the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. Make sure you understand that at first the British lose, so make sure you study Britain's years of defeat, and then the changing of the prime ministers, and then the years of British victory that bring a sharp end and quick end to the war. Okay. Also understand how it develops into a world war. And make sure that you understand that Britain's statement of William Pitt and Lord Halifax won a war in North America with the French, and the fighting begins in 1755 and it ends by 1763. It's concluded by the Treaty of Paris, 1763. Don't forget, at the very end, you have Pontiac's Rebellion in the Northwest Territories, which is ultimately going to lead to the proclamation of 1763, prohibiting the colonists to move west of the Appalachian Mountains and so on. Then the Consumer Revolution, make sure you look over that, and American consumers, as well as the struggle for the land in the East. Make sure you know about the land disputes. The Western rebels and the regulators, please look over the South Carolina regulators and the North Carolina regulators. You want to know the difference between them as you're looking at that too. And that finishes up the material on Chapter 4. And now I'm going to move into the material on Chapter 5. Okay. Now, this is the stuff that leads up into the American Revolution, because now Britain has won the war, the French and Indian War, and their debt doubles from 75 million to 133 million in 1763. And so, you have British troops in the colonies, which are expensive. You have Pontiac's War, essentially protecting the colonists from the neighboring Indians out to the west. Also, you have George Grenville, and who's wanting to reform things. And the taxes that they put on, Britain expects, because they came to save our furry butts, so to speak, because they came and helped us out, they expect that the American colonies will begin to pay for their own defense if they didn't do anything else. There's also an inkling in Britain that maybe the American colonies are sort of slipping out of their control. So you're going to have the Proclamation of 1763, the Sugar Act of 1764, the end of salutary neglect. Make sure you understand what salutary neglect is. The Currency Act of 1764 and the Quartering Act. Then the Stamp Act, and that's going to get the most protests because it's a tax on legal documents, publications needed to offset the cost of the Army in North America, justified on the concept of virtual representation, that the colonists are virtually represented by the members of Parliament, but the colonies see that as taxation without representation. The dynamics of the rebellion against the Stamp Act. You have the Stamp Act Congress, meets in October 1765. Make sure you understand the crowd actions, the actions of the mob, and the roots of the resistance. Some of the traditions for resisting things are back in England, so it's not a new idea that the colonists are resisting this. Then you have the Stamp Act Congress affirming loyalty to the king, but condemning the Stamp and Sugar Acts. Then with getting rid of the tax collectors and hanging the tax collectors in effigy and things like that, Britain repeals the Stamp Act, and there's much celebration in the colonies. But then at the same time, the British are putting out that Declaratory Act. And the Revenue Act reduced the duty on molasses, but imposed on all supplies. Then you have another kind of freedom. Be sure you look over that. Patriot critiques of slavery, Southern responses to that. Then you have the Parliament and Patriots squaring off again. Charles Townshend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is like their treasurer. The Townshend Act of 1767 put duties on colonial imports of paper, paint, glass, and tea that were expected to raise about 40,000 pounds a year. Then we react to that the same way we do the Stamp Act. We put a second boycott. The Daughters of Liberty help out. They start doing homespun clothing, and they drink coffee instead of tea as acts of patriotism, etc. Now, letters from a Pennsylvania farmer, which goes against the Townshend Acts and speaks out against those. There's a petition to the king, not Parliament, against new measures, February of 1768. Also be aware of those circular letters, so that's important to read about there too. The troops that are sent to Boston, the British are angry over opposition. They sent General Thomas Gage and 2,000 troops to Boston. Don't forget that you're going to have the second Wilkes case. You'll need to know that. Don't worry about the first. The troops in Boston ultimately lead to the Boston Massacre and partial repeal of the Townshend Acts, except they keep the tax on tea, which makes them most of the money. So the colonists have a mixed response to this, because some think, yay, we've won, and the rest of the colonists are going, no, we didn't, because we didn't get the whole thing repealed. So there's kind of a mixed bag and review and disagreement on the colonies. But there's definitely disaffection between the colonies and America. Make sure you're aware of the committees of correspondence. Those are important to know about. And then the regulator movement in the Carolinas, which you mentioned in the last chapter. Also the road to independence, 1771, 1776, the tea crisis. British government decided in 1773 to rescue the East India Company from bankruptcy by empowering it to undersell its rivals who were selling low-priced smuggled Dutch tea. The Tea Act retained the tea duty in the colonies and gave the East India Company a monopoly on shipping and distribution of tea. The Patriots saw the act as designed to destroy liberty by seducing colonists into accepting cheaper tea but having to pay taxes. After the Patriots do the Boston Tea Party, Britain's response is the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts. Remember, the 4 coercive acts are the Boston Port Act, a new quartering act allowing people to be kicked out of their homes, the Administration of Justice Act, and the Massachusetts Government Act. All those are put on Massachusetts to try to get them to do it. They're trying to make an example out of Massachusetts. Then the Quebec Act, which is the 5th act, it gets the colonists upset because it makes the Catholic Church in control of the area west of the Appalachian Mountains. You have the Radical Explosion coming after that, and there's much, much anger. Then there's going to be a provincial congress. You're going to have a band of Minutemen set up to call for taxes to be paid in Concord, not in the British government in Boston. They also collect military stores there. Then you have the First Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia with 12 of the 13 colonies meeting. They have a Declaration of Rights and Grievances. And they also have the Rising of the Countryside. Make sure that you understand what the Continental Association is, forcing a third boycott of British goods, setting up a rural network of communities to do its work. And 80% of male heads of households supported non-importation. Southern planters fear dependency, and they support the Massachusetts colony. There's also loyalists and neutrals. There are some supporters of the king that fear anarchy in the colonies. Make sure you study that. Also look at those who are neutral. Then you have violence in the east and violence in the west. Look up Lord Dunmore's War, the power vacuum in the Ohio, and colonial action. Then armed resistance in Massachusetts, the Minutemen, the battles at Lexington and Concord. Make sure you study those. The Second Continental Congress organizes for war. Neither side had a plan to win it in the spring of 1775. They fought an improvised war. Don't make sure that you don't forget the Second Continental Congress. Study up on that, turning the militias into the Continental Army with George Washington in command. Second Continental Congress sent the Olive Branch Petition. They also declared their causes the necessity of taking up arms, but asked, can't we go back just to the way things were? There's fighting in the South, local skirmishes between loyalists and patriots. Look at that. Thomas Paine's Common Sense says it makes sense for us to declare independence and be our own country. Kings are a thing of the past. Independence is declared on July 4th of 1776, and George III rejects the Olive Branch Petition. It left moderates with no option but to yield or fight. July 2nd, they approved the resolution calling for independence. 2 days later, it's adopted, and the British is now sending an army to subdue the colonies. Make sure you go over all that information, and good luck tomorrow and Thursday on your test.